Okay, today we are looking at event and experience, understanding the difference. This is a subject I've touched on before, and it was brought up through, in some way, I can't remember how this week, but I was reminded of the topic and that it was a good one to revisit. So we'll do that. And I will explain to you why I chose this particular picture in just a moment. So it's a volcano with an observer, a person looking at it, and I'll explain that in a moment. But I also want to touch on something else here that has to do with how we view the Bible, and in particular the teachings of Jesus or the Gospels. And I want to use the parable of the dragnet. The kingdom of heaven is like a net that was let down to the sea and caught all kinds of fish. When it was full, the fishermen pulled it up on the shore. Then they sat down and collected the good fish in baskets, but threw the bad away. And this comes from Matthew. When Matthew wrote his gospel, and this particular parable is found only in Matthew, and what scholars would say is this belongs to a category of sayings that they have called the M saying, the M category or the M list of sayings. And that's because only Matthew uses it. Sometimes Matthew and Luke use the same material, and that's referred to as Q. And it's for the German word Quell, which means source. There are other times when all three synoptic Gospels, Mark, Matthew, and Luke, use the same sayings or parables, and that's usually taken from Mark. Matthew and Luke used Mark as the basis for their Gospel. So that's just a bit of information, but what you have to visualize is whoever wrote the Gospel of Matthew, they had a list of sayings. This is the current theory. It's been embraced by scholars for many years now. But this parable would have been there, and it would have had no narrative around it, no interpretation, no anything, just the parable as we see it. So the kingdom of heaven is like a net that was let down into the sea and caught all kinds of fish. And when it was full, the fishermen pulled it up on the shore. Then they sat down and collected the good fish in baskets, but they threw the bad away. So if you just take that parable by itself with no interpretation, no here's how we ought to look at it kind of thing. But what the gospel writers do is they give you the interpretation. And that's what happens here next, where Matthew says, has Jesus saying, and they put words in the mouth of Jesus, this is how it will be at the end of the age. The angels will come and separate the wicked from the righteous and throw them into the blazing furnace, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Now, I'm going to handle this parable in a very different way than is interpreted here. What we have here is what I call a modified context. You have the parable that has no interpretation on it, and then you have this modified context. Here's how you're going to think of this parable. This is how Matthew wants us to think about it. He wants us to think about it as the Christian apocalypse, the end times. And, the fish being sorted out and so forth, that's the good people and the bad people, and they're all going to be divided, and there's going to be a lot of weeping and gnashing of teeth in the end. There will be, of course, smiles too, but not for the ones that get thrown into the blazing furnace. So what we have to keep in mind, is this something a mystic would say, or is it something an evangelist would say? When we ask this question, the mystic would say the original parable. It's a teaching, and we'll see what kind of a spiritual meaning it has through the course of this talk. But the evangelist then would give the Christian message of the end times. That's what Matthew would have wanted his audience to embrace, is this idea that, what we're doing is taking a spiritual teaching and giving it an evangelical twist. So that's part of the lesson I want to get across here today, that these sayings were not interpreted originally. They were probably just collections, and the gospel writers added the interpretations, and they often did it using the voice of Jesus. So that's a difficult thing to sort out until you begin to ask the question, is this something a mystic would say? Is this something that someone that's just trying to get a spiritual idea across? Or is it something the evangelist would say? The evangelist wants his audience to think a certain way about what the person of Jesus would have been teaching. So if we keep that in mind, it's easy to begin to spot these things, to sort them out. What I'm working on now is developing a system where we can figure this out. What I would call a saying like this, the standalone parable, is a straightforward saying. That's probably how the gospel writers had it, how it was presented to them in the first place. A modified saying would be something like this. What I'm calling this is a modified context. We're keeping the straightforward saying, the parable of the dragnet it's called, but we're modifying what it means by giving it another context. And in this case, Matthew's having Jesus summarize it in the way that modifies it, changes the meaning of it. So it's very important to know that's how it happened, that's how scholars believe it happened. That again, Mark was the first to be written, but all of the gospel writers Mark probably started with a simple list of sayings, or a collection of sayings that had been written down over a period of 40 years. And the story of Jesus had been told and modified over this 40-year period. And so by the time Mark started writing, or got his gospel in writing, that story, the modified story, would have been told over and over and over again. But we have to ask the question, is this the story Jesus told? And that's where we understand that the modifications have taken place. Because when you read the parable in its, say, cleaner form, as I'm going to deal with it today, you see a whole different idea come forth. A mystic would have addressed people's consciousness, how they think, how they feel, the things they believe. Because the mystic holds that God is within. And the thing that blocks a harmonious flow of life is consciousness. It's not life's problems. It's how we deal with life's problems. So the spiritual teacher would always deal with how people think, not try to scare the daylights out of them by saying, walk the straight and narrow or else. Join this Christian movement. Join this Jesus movement, it would have been thought of. Or you're going to go to hell. And the church has always used fear as a way to manipulate people's thinking. But the mystic would not do that, because they would know that that was futile to do. You don't want to instill fear in people. You want to instill faith and hope. And the idea that, if the kingdom is here, how do we tap into it? Not wait for it in the future. And that's another way you can tell the difference between something a mystic would say and something the evangelist would say. To the mystic, the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven, is a now present reality. It's a dimension that you don't see with the physical eye. You see it and experience it intuitively. The evangelist, on the other hand, will say it's coming. It's coming in the future. They deal with time and space. So that's a big difference, and one of the ways you can spot when the kingdom of heaven is being discussed in the Gospels, is it being thought of as something that's available now, or is it something that is coming in the future? And that's made very clear when the Pharisees come to Jesus and say, "When will the kingdom come?" That's the evangelical approach. Time and space. When will it come? Sometime in the future. And how does Jesus respond to that? It doesn't come with observation. You don't say it's either lo here or lo there, for the kingdom of God is within you. That's a now experience. It's an inner dimension that we are to awaken to. So the consciousness plays a key role. How we think, what we believe, plays a key role. If you think the kingdom is coming someday, you're always going to be looking to the future. If you think it's here now, you're going to be asking, what am I doing to block it? Why can't I see it if it's here now? What do I need to do to adjust my thinking, my consciousness to the truth of this spiritual dimension? And that's a very different approach, and that is the one based on mystical tradition. And don't think of mystical as mysterious. Think of it as the ability to experience God firsthand. That's the whole bottom line of what the mystic teaches. God is within every person, and if you want to experience God, you don't look up in the sky. You look within yourself. You learn to be still and know. And there are so many sayings attributed to Jesus that if they're left alone, that's what they say. But when you get the additional commentary, the modified context, you'll get the gospel writer telling you, here's how you think of it. You think of it in a different way. You put it in the future. You put it somewhere else. And so that's something that we learn to identify. Okay, on this photo, one of the keys to our spiritual approach is understanding the difference between an event and how we experience it. We don't always have control over events, but we do have much to say about how we experience them. In this photograph, you see an observer standing there in the foreground looking at this volcano. What kind of experience do you think he's having? Just by looking at the picture, he doesn't look like he's afraid. My guess is if that was me, I would be awestruck. I would be looking at it as a thing of just awesome beauty. He's not running, he's just standing there looking at it. So you have an event, which is an erupting volcano, and you have an experience, what that person is going through. So that's the difference. If a person had their village or home devastated by a volcano, they may be having a very different kind of experience. The same event, the eruption of a volcano, and that would be this one. We've got a village that has been totally destroyed by a volcano. Same kind of event, but a very different outcome. And I'm using this extreme example. Not many of us are going to have to deal with volcanoes, although if you want to, you can go over to Dot Zero down the road a little ways, and there's a crater there that you can walk up to, you can drive up to, and see it's a pretty interesting thing. Beth and I went over there, I don't know, last summer before, I can't remember exactly, and tried to photograph it, and it's very difficult to photograph it from the rim, but I have a drone, and I'm going to go over there one of these days and fly the drone over that crater and get a good shot of it. But the experience I had there was not one of terror. You know, there's a chance, I guess, that thing can wake up again, but it's curiosity. So to say the volcano is the event, and how many experiences can be had as the result of that same event. So that's what we want to do, is separate what we're calling an event, something that happens in life, from how we experience it. And see, that's where the whole idea of consciousness comes in. A volcanologist will travel, around the world to find an active volcano. The moment they hear about it, they rush over to it. And it's a very thrilling thing, apparently, for that particular profession. But for the people living under it, it's probably pretty terrifying because the things are obviously quite powerful. But we'll use that as an example and just think of any event that happens in your life. It can be experienced in a variety of different ways. Events do not dictate the experience, is what we're saying. Now, I would say if I was living under a volcano and it started erupting, I would probably have some kind of a negative reaction to it. So let's just take the illustration for what it's worth. Let's say call the volcano anything that happens in your life. But you see, the mystic would focus on the experience, not the event. That's why Jesus, I think, said, don't judge by appearances, because the appearance is not the thing that generates the experience. That's the event. The appearance is the event. What generates the experience is our consciousness. And that's why it's important to look within ourselves for how we are responding to whatever it is that's going on in our life. We can do something about that. You can't necessarily stop the volcano from erupting. That's what they say. That's one thing that we cannot control. We might be able to blow up an asteroid if we discover one's coming in our direction, or change its course a little bit. But we can't stop earthquakes. We can't stop volcanoes. Those are events that we have no control over. But we always have control over the experience that we have. And again, let's not think in such extremes as volcanoes and earthquakes, but it's an easy way to make a distinction. So in the parable, there's two kinds of fish. The good fish represents the experience of peace of mind and freedom from fear. So we're throwing a net into the sea and we're pulling up fish of every kind. Some we're going to keep and some we're going to throw away. And the good fish are the ones that represent the experience of peace of mind and freedom from fear. So if an event happens in your life and you have a fearful experience as a result, what do you do to change that? What do you do to address that? Are you going to keep the bad fish or are you going to keep the good fish? The bad fish represents a response that evokes mental and emotional chaos and fear. Some people are drama kings and queens, as you probably have met a few of those, that they will always have that fish and always respond in that way. But we have to look at consciousness. If this parable is to mean what I think the mystic intended for it to mean, that's what we have to do. We're not worried about the future where some people are going to be saved and go to heaven and some are going to go to hell. We think about what's happening with the event that's going on in our life right now. When responding to one of life's events, which type of fish do you want in your basket? That's the question he's really asking. That's the way the kingdom works. It's like something happens and you have an experience. So who chooses for you to have that experience? We can give that choice to the world, or we can begin to look at it ourselves. And just think of something that pops up in your life where you have a negative reaction. Okay, that would be an example of I'm pulling up the bad fish. I'm hanging on to the bad fish. But I go along a little while and I think about it and I kind of reevaluate things and I open my daily word or read, some favorite book or whatever and get my thoughts back into the positive fish. It's the same event, but I'm looking at it from a different perspective. That's what we're trying to achieve. As I say often, the word prayer, Aramaic word for prayer, slotha, means to make an adjustment. So I have the option to stop hanging on to that bad fish and let it go and keep the good fish instead. The vessel is our consciousness. It's what we're holding on to. It's what we're navigating through our life with or from right now. So we always have a choice. And as human beings, we are often knocked off our feet by the events in our life that pop up. Sometimes they're totally unexpected. And we make choices that are not so good. They put us in a very dark place sometimes. But we can pull out of that. That's the hope, I think, of the parable in the first place. Why would he teach something like this? He's saying to people, you do have a choice. You do have a choice, but stop thinking about the event and think about what kind of fish you're deciding to keep. Where is your mindset? Where is your faith? Where is your hope? Where are you placing your energy at this moment? Are you reacting in fear? Are you in hellfire right now as the result of it? Or are you making a different choice? That's what the mystic would say. That's where the mystic would focus, is on what are you doing with the power you have? Are you flushing it down the toilet, so to speak, or are you building yourself up? Are you holding that energy back and empowering yourself to see things from a higher perspective? And again, we can always be knocked off our feet, but get back up. And that's usually the reaction when something very unexpected comes about. That's usually our reaction. And it's important for us to hold the truth that you can never damage your relationship with God. That's a very important principle to bear in mind. No matter how much you fall down, you have the power to get back up. And the everlasting arms are always there to embrace you, to pull you, to lift you, to bring you back. So you have a bad day, you have a black day, you have a difficult time. The next day will be better because you have that ability to come back and look at that same event from a different place. That's what we always have to bear in mind. You're never going to get to the point in your life, I do not believe, where you're going to love every single event that happens. You're going to say, boy, I just love the fact this volcano is going to swallow my house. I don't think we get to that point or have to get to that point where we think nothing else is going to happen, because I think it will always happen. It's a part of living in a physical body. But do we have something to say about it? What would be the point of a spiritual teaching if we had nothing to say about it? The spiritual teacher simply reminds us that we do have something to say about it. There's another way to experience this event. So you let yourself be bowled over by it first, fine. That'll last a period of time and you'll get over it. You'll come back. And here's what you're going to come back to. You're going to come back to the idea that greater good is now unfolding through this experience or through this event. That there is something better that I'll learn from this, or that I will see that I did not see before. Some greater good will come as the result of this. That's what the spiritual teacher would say. Not, I'm going to teach you how to get rid of all the unexpected events in your life. That would be a false promise. And really, that's what the belief around the second coming, the expected Messiah, was all about. Somebody's going to come, land on earth, and solve all of our problems. Start a new era where there will be no problems. That's based on time and space. It's the hope of a lot of people in new thought and old thought, and it's simply not going to happen. There's not going to be anything drop out of the sky that's going to change your life unless it's an asteroid, and that may not change in what you might consider a positive way. But there's not going to be a person called Jesus return to earth and fix all of the problems. It's not going to happen. The only thing that will fix all the problems is you adjust your experience. You adjust your attitude to adapt to the life that you're living. And you do it in a positive way. You start choosing the good fish. You keep that good fish in your vessel and toss the bad. It's denial and affirmation. Let go of the negative and hold on to the positive. The parable instructs us to keep good fish only. Does this mean we are to force a positive attitude despite the negative event? No. When you force a positive attitude, you're basically changing your thinking. It's the mental side only. We're neglecting the emotional side, which is the most important component of our internal experience. And I talk about that quite a bit. You can change how you think, but if you don't change how you feel, that's your experience. If you're unable to let go of how you feel, you'll think positive, you'll talk positive, you'll talk a good talk, while you are drawn down internally, emotionally. So you're still having the same level of experience, but you're trying to convince the world that you're having something else. And we don't want to do that. That, to me, is one of the greatest weaknesses of a teaching like Unity, is people try so hard to be positive by saying the right things and affirming and all of this, while on a deeper level, they're still afraid. They're still responding in fear to things. And they think if they bombard that thing enough with positive affirmations, that emotion will go away, and it doesn't. You've got to look at it directly. That's a bad fish. And so what kind of fish do you have? You think you've got a positive fish. Maybe you do have a little positive fish there, but you've got a big negative fish. And that's the emotion. So it's bringing both, and that's what, when we talk about consciousness, we're talking about thought and emotion. And I'm not just talking about feel-good type of emotion where you generate feelings of positive feelings, where you force yourself to feel positive because you really don't. And I would relate that to when I was baptized, when I was immersed. That was a very emotional time. I was a kid, and I felt like I did something big, but it was not a permanent life changer. It was not the baptism of the Holy Spirit or the whole Spirit. It was an intellectual, shallow, emotional experience, but it was not a permanent change. The permanent change comes when you directly experience that deeper reality that is the centerpiece of the teaching of the mystic. The kingdom of God is within you. When you touch that center of power, it changes you, where you can look at that same event, but from a whole different place. And that's when you know your prayer is answered. That's when you know you have actually risen above it. But we don't want to just try to think ourselves into the kingdom. That's trying to take the kingdom by storm, as Jesus pointed out. You've got to take your emotional side with you, and not the shallow emotion, but that emotion of knowing the absolute. I know everything's working out. I absolutely know this is true. Get to the point where you're there at that place, and sometimes you have to just sit down and just keep releasing, keep letting go, and keep looking at what's going on inside of you, the reaction, all the negativity that's there, that emotional side, until you feel that begin to dissipate. And we can all do that. But that's where the power is. The power is in us. And when we are reacting in fear, we're putting a lid on that. And we're saying, I only have so much, and I can only deal with so much, and all of that. So we're actually defining ourselves, and we want to lift that definition to let it be what we are in truth. The good fish includes the mental and emotional aspects of our experience. This means our response to an event is grounded not in appearances, but in spiritual truth. So that's what I mean when we, it's not just a word game that we're playing. This is a new experience that we're having. I know everything's working out. I don't know how. And see, that's the intellect wants to know how. But if you say to yourself, I don't have to know how to tap that level of peace, then you will tap that level of peace. And the way will be shown. Seek first the kingdom, and all these things will be added. That's what a mystic would say. Seek first that center of power. You don't have to know how it's going to work out. But the way that it will work out does present itself in time. And it may be that, in the three-dimensional world, all the factors aren't in place right now. That things have to line up in a way that they begin to manifest. It's first the blade, then the ear, then the full grain in the ear. It's a process. So the moment you touch that center of power, just imagine that this process is initiating, it's starting. Seek first the kingdom, the center of power, and the way through the problem, the way through the event will manifest itself to us. So when life throws us a negative event, our good fish response would go something like this. Greater good is now unfolding. The path forward opens before me. I know what to do and I do it. Okay, these are words. These are statements. So how emotionally involved are we in these things when we say them? That's the key right there. Say the words, but believe that what you ask for in prayer is true. That's the key. Greater good is now unfolding. Just think of any situation in your life right now that you'd like to see changed. Let's say that together. Greater good is now unfolding. The path forward opens before me. Let's think of that. Same thing. And I'm thinking of our church right now. The path forward opens before me. Let's say that together. The path forward opens before me. I know what to do and I do it. Let's say that. I know what to do and I do it. Okay, to say that, part of me would say, well, I don't know what to do. But don't back up and, take another shot at it from a negative. You're reaching back down and picking up that bad fish. The facts don't matter. What matters is the set of mind that you are setting up at this moment. I know what to do and I do it. What that does, it opens something in us where we can see the path, we can see the next step to take. We know our prayer is answered when we can observe the event with genuine peace of mind and freedom from fear. The spiritual principle embodied in this parable is, in fact, the truth that sets us free. So you can see the difference in this parable, and this is just one example. There are many examples where you have a parable that has a spiritual teaching, but what I just shared with you has nothing to do with the end of the end times, has nothing to do with the destruction of the world. It has everything to do with how we handle life's events. And that, to me, is what the mystic would be teaching. Not sometime in the future things are going to happen and it's not going to be good. So you see the difference. And the more you see this, if you read through the Bible, you'll see how these things work. All four Gospels are what I would call a modified context. That is, they're taking the teaching of Jesus and they're telling us, the reader, how to think of these. But the question is this how Jesus would have had us think of them? And the answer, I think, is no. So we have to have the courage to be able to separate. And those two interpretations, I consider the good fish and the bad fish. I'll take the Jesus fish any day, what he actually taught, over what I'm being told that he taught. And we can find this, and it's not that difficult to do. Thank you for watching this week's program. If you enjoyed this video, please share it with others. We want to reach as many people as we can, and we appreciate your help. If you'd like to help support this ministry, just click the donate card at the top right-hand corner of your screen. Your financial support means a lot to us. We have many subjects in our video lineup, so feel free to take a look. If there's a topic you don't see and would like me to address, just put it in the comment section. I'd love to know what's on your mind. To subscribe to this channel, simply click our logo. Thanks again for your interest in Independent Unity, and have a wonderful week.